So dear beloved community, it's so wonderful to be together with everyone again. I can't believe it's been 2 months. I've missed everybody so much. I've been thinking of all of my friends, those of you who are from Europe and are with us tonight, those of you who are from the United States, those from the Middle East, those from Africa, and those from Australia. Here in Sydney, we're now entering our 8th week of lockdown. So it's a wonderful chance to practice. It's a wonderful chance, especially here in Bilpin, to watch each and every day the beautiful spring emerging. Even in this most difficult of moments, this most challenging of moments, whether here in our own little experience or in the greater experience of our world, spring comes. Over the past year, we've explored so many wonderful topics in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha. Hopefully you've found these topics helpful in your own personal practice. Over the past year, we've explored together the Noble Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, the 4 nutriments, the 7 factors of awakening, the 5 hindrances, and the last series of Dharma talks was on the Book of Eights, the Atthagavagga, which is considered to be one of the most ancient texts in the Pali Canon. It's a stripped back and unadorned version, kind of almost an acoustic version, to use the modern day expression, of many of the core teachings that would continue to flower over many years and will continue to flower into the future. We discovered that insight and the path of mindfulness, rather than manifesting through accumulating more information, or even through gaining something that we think we don't already have, actually consists in letting go. Letting go of what? Letting go of our tendency to cling on to our ideas of what liberation, freedom, happiness, ourselves, or even our path is. We cling onto these things by holding onto them tightly with an attitude of, to paraphrase Clint Eastwood, "You need to pry these from my cold, dead hands." And we think that through holding on in this way to our views, our ideas, our rites and rituals, whatever they might be, we get security. We get ground under our feet through these external things. This is our mistaken idea. As we discovered in the Book of Eights, this tendency to cling on to things, whether they're views, whether they're opinions, people, situations, or things outside of ourselves in general for security, is like being a fish in a rapidly drying up puddle. Since everything is changing all the time, the things that we cling on to can't really give us the true security that we're craving for, that we desperately want. The core teaching of the Buddha is that we actually have enough. We are enough. And everything that we think we lack, everything we've been running around so desperately in order to find, has been there all along. And it all begins and continues with being willing to ask questions of ourselves and the stories we tell. Often we don't, though. Being willing to ask questions and continually being in a process of exploration is an essential part of mindfulness practice. I've told the story of the time when I was a young novice, quite a long time ago now. And I went to my teacher and I asked him a question, and he listened very carefully. And then he gave me the hammer. He gave me a really strong teaching. He said, "Brother Phappai, please don't waste my time asking me questions that you already know the answer to." At the time, I was not very happy with that answer of Taya. Actually, I was quite angry with Taya. I thought, I've come and I've shared a really important question and you're kicking me out the door. There, outside of Tay's hut in the upper hamlet, there's some gravel, and I remember walking out of Tay's hut and I was kicking the gravel up the path. It was only a few weeks later, and I fully admit that I'm not the sharpest of practitioners, that I realized that my teacher had given me the most important gift. Rather than relying on someone external, he'd actually pointed back to the fact that yes, I did indeed know what I needed to do. I just didn't want to do it. And a good teacher will always do that. A good teacher will always point us back to that which we have within ourselves already. It's important to ask questions of our teachers, our friends, but most importantly to ask questions of ourselves, the views that we have, and so forth. As I've just said, a good teacher, in fact, the only real and worthy teacher, will point you back to the wisdom within you, and that's not always easy. It's not always comfortable. If we're always hearing things that confirm our pre-existing views, what we've already learned, how are we going to grow? Our teacher, of course, might be any experience we have, and not just a person. I've shared before of my beloved brother Joel Ben Izzy, who's a professional storyteller and the author of a book called The Beggar King and the Secret of Happiness. In that book, interspersed with wisdom stories from around the world, he tells the story of how he, as a professional storyteller, lost his voice and was unable to speak, and how he found it again. Insight begins to manifest when we become interested in the storylines of our life, and we don't take them for reality with a capital R anymore. Speaking of reality with a capital R, not so far away from here is a tourist attraction called the Explorer's Tree, and it supposedly marks where the first non-indigenous explorers crossed the Blue Mountains and allegedly carved their initials on a large tree there. I consider it to be an extremely important Dharma talk, and I love thinking about it. The reason for this is that historians do not actually agree that the explorers went there. The dating of the initials that were allegedly carved into the tree is in dispute, as of course is the question of whether it's actually the explorers' initials that are carved into the tree. Also, actually, there's not really a tree. There's just a concrete smeared stump, and the list goes on. In a way, it's the quintessential Australian tourist attraction. But it's also a great Dharma talk in and of itself. What are you doing listening to this talk? Go and look at these amazing Dharma talks that are already there in your life. So asking questions is important. Last year, I told the story of my beloved Nasruddin, who traveled all the way from his rural village to the capital. And when he finally returned, everyone gathered around and asked him what happened. Nasruddin replied, "I was standing at the palace gates when the king's procession passed by, and guess what? The king spoke to me." Everyone was in awe and began raving about it. Wow, the king spoke to our Nasruddin. So it was such a big deal for the village that they decided to hold a banquet in the town to celebrate Nasruddin's, and by extension, the village's great accomplishment. The king spoke to a person of their village. What a celebration, and what a special moment. Such an honor had come to the town. Speeches and toasts in Nasruddin's honor were made, and halfway through one of the speeches, the village idiot, every village has one, the village idiot stood up, and he called out a question that no one had asked up until then. "So Nasruddin, what did the king actually say?" Nasruddin slowly and graciously stood up, and he replied, "The king said to me, 'Get out of the way.'" Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. So don't forget to ask questions. Asking questions is really important. The kind of questions that we ask will shape the insight that arises. And this energy of curiosity, of exploration, is one of the fruits of mindfulness. I shared earlier that the text that we were exploring in the previous series, the Book of Eights, the Atthagavagga, is considered to be one of the most ancient texts in the Pali Canon. It was very interesting over the last week or so to see in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha discussion group, when I asked the question of our Sangha members, what do you think I'm going to talk about next? To see the responses that people were giving, so many great topics. Only one person actually guessed the topic of this series, so we'll see if that person's with us this evening. I remember being my teacher's attendant, and oftentimes he would ask us just before giving a public talk or giving a talk in a retreat, what do you think Tay should speak about this evening? We always had to be ready. And I find that it was a beautiful moment because Tay always wanted us to be in touch with the Dharma that was alive in our life, and to ask for teachings on things that were relevant, and not to be so passive in our practice, in our mindfulness practice, but to be really engaged. So the series that we just completed, which took about 6 months, on the Book of Eights, was on one of the most ancient texts, or what is considered to be one of the most ancient texts in the canon. And it was really fun. We discovered a lot in that series. And that being said, I've noticed that there's a tendency in some of us to think that somehow the Pali Canon is more authentic or more ancient than the Mahayana teachings. There's the thought, it's unspoken or made explicit by some, that in some way the Pali Canon represents a more authentic version of the Buddha's teachings than the Mahayana Canon. The Mahayana Canon being sutras such as the Heart Sutra or the Diamond Sutra, Sutra of 42 chapters, or the Sutra on the 8 realizations of great beings. There's the idea that the Mahayana Canon is an expansion of the teachings that was made by later teachers. And in this way, there can sometimes be a hidden idea that there's a Buddhism or a mindfulness practice that's more authentic or more real. The Buddha himself shared that a teaching is authentic if it contains 3 things. They're called the 3 Dharma seals. Dukkha, which is a teaching on unsatisfactoriness. There's anicca, impermanence, the fact that things are always in a process of change. And anatta, interbeing or no separate self, or this is because that is, which is a very practical way to be able to touch interconnection. So listen carefully. Write it on your heart. An authentic Buddhism, an authentic teaching, an authentic practice is one that contains these characteristics, yes, but most importantly, helps you to transform your situation. In fact, research is showing us that it's not quite the case that the Pali Canon somehow represents an earlier, with the assumption that it's somehow purer or more authentic form of Buddhism. Those of you who participated in my Metta Sutta class over the past year will recall the rollicking story of how the Buddha was an itinerant wanderer, and there were very few, if any, who'd heard all the teachings of the Buddha. I know some of you have asked me to keep on with the story of how the teachings were recorded. You found it enjoyable, and I'm definitely somebody who likes to tell stories, so we'll get there. Isn't it wonderful that when we think about it, the Buddha's teachings touch the hearts of so many, and they've been remembered and passed down for so many centuries. It's actually always a very humbling thing as a Dharma teacher to ask friends what they remember about your teaching. I like to do it often. It's very humbling. It's a great reality check. Rather than inscribing the teachings on the heart for centuries, often if a talk is given in the morning, there are various recollections of what was said by the time we have discussion groups in the afternoon. Here in Mountain Spring, before the lockdown began, I was giving a series of teachings on Sunday mornings. And during my last talk, I asked friends how many were present for my previous talk. A number of hands were raised, and I asked them whether they remembered what the topic was about. No one could. So this certainly puts things in perspective, doesn't it? I guess we have to think of it as planting seeds. I wholeheartedly recommend this practice if you're a teacher, and if you think your teaching is actually touching hearts. Ask people how many people remember the teaching you gave in the previous talk. You might be surprised. Everyone knows that I find Buddhist history fascinating, and I'm hoping to inspire that interest in everyone. So I wanted to offer just a fragment here. This is not exactly the topic of the next series, but it's also not the topic of the series. And if anybody knows me, you know I like to put these little things in. So here we go. The Pali Canon is the version of the Buddha's teachings that's been passed down to us from the Tamrashakya lineage, which is one of the 18 original schools of Buddhism. In fact, some of the most ancient written Buddhist texts, which are carbon dated to the year 75 of the Common Era, were discovered in Pakistan, our beloved Afghanistan, which is one of the main places where the roots and teachings of Buddhism flourished for so many centuries, and is especially on our heart at this moment in time. And these fragments that were discovered in Pakistan and Afghanistan and dated to around about the year 75 are called the Gandharan fragments. These fragments are from a similar period to the period in which the Pali Canon is said to have been composed. It's therefore a fair assumption that the teachings were in oral circulation at roughly the same time. The Pali Canon, again, being the version of the teachings that was transmitted through only one of the 18 lineages that were the 18 original schools of Buddhism. So any student of the Buddhist texts will tell you that the texts are meant to be recited. If you come to any of our monasteries, you'll hear ancient chants or recitations. The texts are meant to be spoken and recited. And in fact, Buddhism was primarily an oral tradition for a number of centuries. And even today, in the monastic culture, a lot of our way of life is transmitted orally, through the way orally and physically. A number of these written fragments that comprise the Gandharan fragments were composed by members of the Dhammaguptaka lineage, which is one of the Vinaya lineages that continues today, and we in Plum Village continue this lineage. Some of these texts in the Gandharan fragments are what are considered today to be Mahayana texts, such as the Astasahasrika Prajaparamita Sutra, one of the sutras that is in the same collection of teachings as the Heart Sutra. Why am I sharing this? Why have I gone down this rabbit hole? I'm sure a number of friends are wondering. I'm sharing this because over the next few months we're going to be delving into a topic that's usually thought of as a Mahayana topic, a great vehicle topic. And I'd like to plant the seed of understanding in each of my friends that these topics don't necessarily represent a later expansion of the teachings. They have been there since roughly the same time as the Pali Canon was composed. And I felt it was important to go in this direction as I was reflecting on this next series of teachings, because I don't want to give this mistaken impression after having given teachings on the Book of Eights that the Mahayana teachings are somehow a little bit woo-woo. They're actually essential. In the Mahayana teaching, one very important practice is to nurture our mind of love. Our teacher Tay has written a whole book on this called Cultivating the Mind of Love. The mind of love is another way of translating the Sanskrit term bodhichitta, that energy that helps us to break out of our tendency to run after only our own little small comforts, and moves us into connecting with and being present with all the people, all the situations, all the experiences that we call the other or they. Pema Chodron describes bodhicitta in a beautiful way. She calls it our soft spot. That place where we're not so guarded and where we're able to meet ourselves, others, and the world around us with openness and fearlessness. This quality of love is an essential quality of the path. Without this warm heart, our practice is or will soon become dry and boring. In Chinese, in the Chinese monasteries, in Gaomenzi, they call somebody who doesn't have this quality of this warm-hearted quality of bodhicitta as someone whose practice is like has the characteristic of being like a dried up papaya. Let's have a sound of the bell. Bodhicitta is a big word, and it can be quite a big concept. And so in trying to find skillful ways for friends to access the qualities of bodhicitta, lately I've been referring to bodhicitta as Buddy-Citta, the capacity to open a space of unconditional friendliness to everything that is within us and everything around us. We open a space of friendship and curiosity not only towards ourselves and others, but to all that we call the other, or all that we want to get rid of, perhaps even parts of ourselves. Our anger, our sadness, our loneliness, the things perhaps that we're ashamed of. One of the miracles of mindfulness that Tay speaks about is that mindfulness brings us to life. Life here is life just as it is, with all the parts of ourselves just as we are. If we've understood, even to some extent, the nature of dukkha, the understanding that in this existence, there's always going to be something not perfect. Coming to life means, first of all, embracing our lives as they are right now, and knowing that it's from this place that arises transformation and deep insight. This is where insight becomes possible. To be okay with doesn't mean to ignore suffering or to have a Pollyanna complex. It means to see and to understand the causes and conditions that lead something to come to be in our life or in our heart. In Buddhism, we hear a lot about the image of the lotus. I really want to plant lotuses here in Mountain Spring. Every time I walk past the ponds and the dams that we have here, I think about planting lotuses. I'd love to have a lotus pond like all the other Plum Village centers. When I was Tay's attendant, he and I used to dig up lotus roots, and he taught me how to cook them. However, the water here is too deep. Now that's probably a Dharma talk in and of itself. Maybe it'll come later. The lotus grows in the mud. It doesn't grow on the marble. In the same way, the lotus of your heart, of your mind, begins to sprout when we're brave enough to stop running away from our life and to turn to look deeply into what's arising in our mind, in our heart, in our life. This is the essence of real bodhichitta, the mind of love. This is where it begins to arise as a lived reality, not just as an idea. This unconditional friendliness shown to all aspects of your life. Otherwise, it's just an idea. And we have a lot of ideas. They haven't helped us so much. But often this is hard. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I was thinking of sugarcoating since a lovely person here in Bilpin dropped at the door yesterday 2 donuts, and they're sugar-coated. So I was thinking about sugarcoating. And while sugarcoating is delicious and definitely needed on donuts, it's not needed in terms of the Dharma. And I don't want to sugarcoat this. It's hard. There are so many things that we might want to get rid of. Over the past couple of months, I've received so many beautiful messages from friends, wishing me well or wishing that I feel better. And so I've been thinking a lot about this and what healing really means. Since in my situation, with a chronic and progressive and degenerative illness, it's clear to me that in my experience, healing does not mean getting rid of the symptoms, even if that were possible. Feeling better doesn't even mean going back to the way things were before, even if that were possible. For me, it's a constant practice of being willing to show up for whatever is there, for caring for it and observing how it came to be and how it's changing moment to moment, of inhabiting fully my life just as it is. In this way, by showing up in this way, my situation is the greatest and most important teacher of my life. You have the greatest teachers of your life as well, and they may not be people. What does it mean to open a space of unconditional friendliness and curiosity to those situations? This is the hidden wisdom. Our greatest teachers are the ones that we most overlook. Often the ones that we want to get rid of. Our pain, our confusion, our sadness. These are the most precious teachers you will ever meet in your life, if you have enough courage to be able to turn around and to look them in the eye and to ask them what they have to teach you. If there's one thing I want to invite all of my friends to practice, if there's one thing that I would like to ask you to remember and contemplate, even if, as is likely, all the other aspects of this talk are forgotten, then please remember this. Please show up for your life just as it is. Love it for what it is. Love yourself for who you are, and become curious about the things or people or feelings or situations you think you need to get rid of in order to get to some imagined destination or imagined state of mind. By doing so, you'll find the taproot of wisdom right in the heart of your own life. And this requires courage and a sense of humor, but it is what a real, authentic mindfulness practice is all about. Anything else is just a notion. This is bodhichitta. This is Buddy-Citta. Having trust in your capacity to show up for everything and not be afraid. I want to share this again. Having trust in your capacity to show up for everything and not be afraid. So don't be fooled by the pretty shiny things. Don't think you need to have it all figured out. Figuring things out never really got us anywhere. Make the journey from your head to your heart, all of that mental energy, to inhabiting your body. Be messy and be real. Please do this most simple, everyday, most profound work of showing up with loving attention for what is little by little, and then all the time. In this way, we're worthy continuations of our teachers, all those who've touched our life. Let's have a sound of the bell. So in the Plum Village tradition, we practice Mahayana Buddhism, the great vehicle. Mahayana Buddhism is sometimes described as Paramitayana, the vehicle of crossing over, or the vehicle of cultivating the perfections. Our journey within the great vehicle begins when we touch and we begin to cultivate this precious seed that we all have within us, bodhichitta, the mind of love. Love here is not a small, limited love, as in I love movies and long walks on the beach. Who doesn't? But a deep cherishing of ourself and of all living beings, which gives rise to a wish to support and be of benefit. When we look deeply at our own situation and all of the dissatisfaction and difficulties we face, and if we look deeply at the situation of others, if we're a person who is able to recognize the many kindnesses that are being offered to us in every moment, then very naturally this quality of mind that we call bodhicitta begins to emerge. This wish that we're able to support and be of benefit to others who are not separate from ourselves, as much as it might seem that way. Everything, all of the good conditions that we enjoy right now in this moment haven't come about just through our own efforts, but through the efforts of so many over centuries. One of the great barriers in our heart to cultivating this beautiful seed of bodhicitta is our habitual sense of entitlement. Recognizing the great web of kindness that we exist in and that we benefit from is the first step of the emergence of real bodhicitta, the mind of love. This mind of love is the essence of the great vehicle. I'm not a separate self, a lonely, isolated individual separated from others, but actually I'm deeply connected. So much has been done and is being done right now to make my life beautiful and possible. As a monk in general, and here in Bilpin specifically, I experience this every single day. It's so moving. There are friends in Bilpin that even without me having to say anything, know that it's very difficult for me to leave the house right now. So they drop by food or vegetables or kind letters or even packages that arrive at the post office. This recognition of fundamental interconnectedness of all things is referred to in Buddhism by the technical term emptiness or interbeing. Interbeing is not a rejection of existence. Emptiness is not a rejection of existence, but rather this deep recognition of the interconnectedness of everything that is. This is because that is. This is not because that is not. There's a wonderful 8th century text by Shantideva called The Way of the Bodhisattva. I read a section of this text every day. I also love the backstory to this text, but I promise I won't go down that rabbit hole. I like the stories of the origins of things, and Shantideva was somebody in his monastery who everybody looked down upon. People thought, this person just eats the rice of the community and doesn't practice. He's just sitting around. He became famous for sleeping during meditation and not showing up to like the community work and all these kind of things. He was considered to be a lazy monk. So the other monks said, right, we're sick and tired of this. This is after a few years. We're sick and tired of this. We're going to put him in his place. So it was time for like a series of teachings, kind of like the retreat, the annual retreat that we have every year in the Buddhist community, which is a 3-month retreat. And we offer teachings on kind of key topics usually for the monastic community. So they decided to ask Shantideva to offer these teachings. So they thought this would be great. This will put him in his place. And if you've ever been to one of these really traditional meditation halls, they don't just have cushions on the floor when you're giving a Dharma talk, but they have like a throne, like a very high platform for the teacher to go up and to give a teaching on. So Shantideva climbed up to the platform, climbed up all of the stairs and sat on the platform. And I like to imagine all the monks, all the other monks sitting there kind of just waiting for Shantideva to start talking and make a fool of himself. But then when Shantideva began speaking, he offered this beautiful teaching called The Way of the Bodhisattva, which is, as I shared, an absolutely beautiful text, which is all about bodhichitta, the mind of love. It moved when Shantideva was teaching, it moved everyone to tears. When he was reciting this teaching from his heart. And it's become one of the most treasured texts on this quality of bodhicitta up to this moment. In this text, bodhicitta is described as being like a flash of lightning in the dark of night that illuminates all that's there. Bodhicitta or Buddy-Citta helps us to see things clearly, to see things in a wider sense than we normally experience them, like a flash of lightning. The mind of love illuminates the world outside and the world inside. There are 2 aspects to bodhicitta, relative and absolute. Relative bodhicitta, which is the compassionate wish to wake up, to transform our suffering for the benefit of everyone and to realize that aspiration, is described as having 2 aspects, bodhicitta in intention and bodhicitta in action. So bodhicitta, the mind of love as intention, is the wish to be of benefit, to care for ourselves and to care for others. It's like an aspiration. Perhaps we could describe it as the intention to go on a journey somewhere. I should probably say that on the lighter side, that here in Sydney, all we can have at the moment is the intention to go on a journey. Since in lockdown, our journey consists of walking from the kitchen to the lounge room. But if you understand the difference between intention and action, you get my point. Bodhicitta as action is actually setting out on the journey that we envisage. Actually opening the door and taking steps on the path in the direction that we want to go. Actually caring for and benefiting ourselves and others. Just between you and me, I think that many of us are experts at the first aspect of bodhicitta, bodhicitta in intention. In Australia, we have a lot of slang, and we like to give people nicknames. Instead of saying going to, in the sense of I am going to do something, people will often say gonna. I'm gonna do this or do that. I grew up in the countryside, and one of my classmates from primary school, elementary school, for those of us in the United States that are listening to this talk, my classmates, we remained together from elementary school, from primary school, all the way through high school, being in the country together. So one of my classmates was actually given the nickname Gunna because he was always saying that he was gonna do this or gonna do that, but he never quite got around to it. We are experts. We have a master's degree in Gunna. We experience many more challenges with transforming intention into action. I wonder why that is. That might be a helpful reflection in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha this month. What's the challenge? What's the challenge between moving from intention into action? Why is it? So the second aspect of bodhicitta is called absolute bodhicitta. And this is the direct insight into the nature of things, without any thought. Just like the example of the right hand gripping the left thumb, without any thought, if the left thumb is hit by a hammer into being. When we speak of bodhicitta, this mind of love, then in some way everyone who actively cultivates this seed is called a bodhisattva. In terms of absolute bodhicitta, in the Diamond Sutra we have a very powerful verse. If a bodhisattva holds on to the idea that a self, a person, a living being, or a lifespan exists, then that person is not a true bodhisattva. So in this teaching from the Diamond Sutra, we're again reminded of this fundamental teaching of interconnectedness, of the fact that this is because that is. This is not because that is not. The earth store bodhisattva, Ksitigarbha, the bodhisattva of the great vow, is sometimes described as the greatest of all bodhisattvas because he or she made the vow to enter hell, to enter the darkest places, the places of despair, and to be present with those who are suffering greatly. He or she made the vow that they'll always remain in the darkest places until all beings transform their situation. So this is a paradoxical vow. Living beings are limitless. I will help every single one. I will be present with them all. And yet it's the vow of this bodhisattva, of great aspiration. The quality here is the quality of determination, of non-fear, directed towards our own suffering and the suffering of others. Even though it seems endless, I will keep going. I'll never forget the letter that I wrote to Tay and to the Sangha asking to ordain as a novice monk. I wrote so many beautiful things, such as I will enter even the darkest places and I will bring relief. So cute. This was wonderful, but let's face it, a little idealistic. As I've gotten older and a lot less wiser, my aspiration is expressed in much more simple terms. When I unexpectedly ended up here in Mountain Spring last year, I lit incense in front of the shrine. In fact, we didn't even have a shrine back then. We had a cardboard box that had a small Buddha statue on it. So I lit a stick of incense and placed it on the cardboard box. And I prostrated and I made a simple vow. May I be useful. I find it really interesting that in the iconography, Ksitigarbha is often depicted as holding a wish-fulfilling jewel, in Sanskrit a chintamani, in his hand, a jewel that's incredibly radiant and that illuminates the darkness. In the text I mentioned earlier, the way of the Bodhisattva, bodhicitta, this vulnerable and compassionate heart, is described as being a wish-fulfilling jewel, a jewel that helps us to manifest peace, to manifest stability, to manifest compassion for ourselves and for all that surround us. Right understanding, beneficial action, great compassion, and the deep aspiration to be present for living beings. These are the fundamental qualities of this so-called great vehicle. The path of choosing not to leave any part of our experience out, or any living being out. They're the qualities of bodhicitta in intention, as well as being the manifestation of bodhicitta in action. What does bodhicitta look like? What does it look like in our life? These four qualities of understanding, of acting to be of benefit for ourselves and for others, of generating and offering compassion to ourselves and to others. I think the one we're hardest on most of the time is ourself, as well as the aspiration, the deep vow to always be there by the side of those in need, a bodhicitta in action. So in Buddhism, we speak of two vehicles of practice that exist within us, and these are not external vehicles, but attitudes of the mind and the heart that can manifest themselves in our practice. The small vehicle, which in some way has the focus of getting something that we think we don't have. The small vehicle of getting peace, getting happiness, getting liberation. And the great vehicle, which arises from understanding that not only is the practice not about getting things, it's fundamentally about letting things go. As Tay, our teacher, has shared with us, happiness, liberation, peace is not an individual matter. When we understand this sense of together with all beings who are not separate from me, it's then that this great vehicle arises within us. The great vehicle means to be willing to see the most ordinary moments and experiences and encounters of our life as the most precious moments to wake up. This is what's meant by not leaving anything out. Sweeping the floor is the most profound spiritual moment you might have. Chopping the vegetables, cutting the grass. It's not just sitting in the meditation hall. It's said that the energy of bodhicitta arises from a sense of responsibility, the understanding that the happiness and suffering of others is not separate from our own. So over the next few weeks, we'll be learning and putting into practice 7 ways to cultivate bodhicitta, this mind of love, as well as 7 ways that it manifests in our life. So while this is not a checklist to get somewhere, the first 6 practices that we'll explore are considered to be the causes for the 7th practice, the 7th point, the absolute bodhicitta, to manifest. This is because that is. And this practice that we're going to be exploring comes from a very old text. This 7-part practice, which in some ways can be seen as a practice of generating cause and effect, in the sense that if you plant and nurture this seed, you'll have this result. And it has 6 practices which are the causes for the 7th step, absolute bodhicitta, to arise. So please don't be thinking that these practices are like a checklist. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Buddhism, mindfulness practice in many ways is a spiral journey, and each of these practices contains all the others. Practice one of them well, you've already practiced the rest of them. In fact, cultivating these steps of bodhicitta begins with a practice that's not even included in the 7 steps. And that's cultivating a sense of equanimity, in which we notice our tendency to be drawn to some people or situations or attitudes and repulsed by others. For our vehicle to be really great, it has the foundational attitude of understanding that every single thing has its value and its importance, and that in our vehicle we'll carry along everything: the joy, the happiness, the pain, the sorrow, the most beautiful and the most terrible. And we'll not only carry them along like some kind of gothic Santa, but we're going to come to an understanding of these things. This is the ground from which wisdom arises. It's the only ground from which wisdom arises. That can be a wonderful thing or a scary thing. We practice to cultivate a sense of openness towards everyone and everything. The understanding of everyone and everything being equal arises when we understand that everyone and everything has at some time been our friend. Everybody at some time has been our enemy. Everyone at some time has been a stranger. And their status is always changing moment to moment due to so many causes and conditions. This is a transformative reflection, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. In this sense, everyone, even those that we might think right now are our enemies, perhaps, everyone's the same. Based on this understanding, it becomes possible to generate loving compassion for everyone. Please understand that loving kindness is not trying to force yourself to like everyone or everything. I need to tell you, I don't like seaweed. I have tried so many times. However, it doesn't mean that I think seaweed needs to disappear in order for me to be happy. I can happily be seaweed adjacent, and I can be delighted at those who enjoy seaweed, but please, friends, don't offer me seaweed. Or if you offer me seaweed, please rejoice when I offer it to another person. Having loving kindness towards those we see and experience as harmful and destructive, as well as those who we see and experience as kind and pleasant, doesn't mean we necessarily agree with their actions or we pretend to like them. Rather, we practice to embrace the reality that this is the way things are right now for them, as well as for us. We also don't see other beings as merely a mosquito, for example. We don't put people in certain boxes all the time. We meet people and others new and fresh every single time, because everybody and everything's always in a state of change. What a beautiful, vulnerable place that puts us in when we touch that, really. Rather, we see ourselves and this being or this experience or this mental formation as a flowing stream that in this moment happens to have a particular form due to various causes and conditions. Happiness, sadness, loneliness, insight, a flower, seaweed, this experience I call me, just like a river, is continuously flowing on, continuously changing. Nothing remains in one form for very long. When we see this, even for the briefest of moments, our hearts begin to open to the complexity and the preciousness of our experience, and the same for all those that we call the other, or all those parts of ourselves that we try to push aside. This quality of mind creates the condition for what we call equanimity to arise. And this quality of sameness, of equanimity, is the basis for developing these 7 steps of the mind of love. Let's have a sound of the bell. If we can touch this, we can begin the first contemplation of the 7 steps. Although, as we've seen already, it's not really the first contemplation. Some of us, the more spreadsheet-oriented among us perhaps. By the way, before friends begin writing comments, as many of you know, I have nothing against spreadsheets. I like a good spreadsheet. But anyway, some of us who are more list-oriented might find the fact that the first step is not really the first step frustrating. I think it's wonderful, since it reminds us once again of the fact that everything is due to causes and conditions. With the arising of this, that arises. When conditions are no longer sufficient, that transforms, and this is an empowering insight. The first, but as we've seen, not really the first, contemplation is to see and recognize every living being as your parent or your mother. This is to recognize that each being at some point has been our mother in some sense. This month in the Vietnamese tradition and Chinese traditions, we celebrate Ulaanbaatar, Vulan, or the rose ceremony. In this season, we reflect on what we've received from our parents and our ancestors, how their stories, their wisdom, their joys, their pain continue on in us. Many of you will be familiar with Tay's book, A Rose for Your Pocket, in which he shares about recognizing the love of a mother. Later, he shared that this moment was the moment in which insight began to flower in him. For sure, I know that many of us have had a lot of suffering with our parents. So rather than focusing just on the person of a mother, we can approach it in a different way. And in some way, this can actually help us to be able to begin to repair our relationships, understanding the complexity of a person's experience. We don't need to subscribe to the notion of physical rebirth in order to practice this contemplation, this step. As I've shared in previous talks, the word birth, or jati in Pali, doesn't only refer to physical birth, but the moment-to-moment arising and passing away of things. Let's stop for a moment and contemplate a sensation. See if you can note a sensation in your body, observing it just as it is in this moment. Perhaps it's an itch, an ache. It arises, it's there for a while, it keeps changing, it disappears. Might be just a split second, might be 10 years. However, even while it's present, it's constantly changing. This is what's meant by birth, jati. Just contemplate the role of a parent. In every moment when we interact with others, something is born in us, and something's born in them. Recognizing everyone as our relation, being our parent or our mother, radically changes our way of relating to others. Here we're going beyond just having equanimity towards everyone. We're cultivating the capacity of seeing that we're actually deeply connected with everyone. In fact, even though we may not always see it, in fact, there are supportive conditions there. We can cultivate a close, warm relationship. A couple of months ago, I shared about the quality of parental mind, or elder's mind, or nurturing mind that was described by Zen Master Dogen. In Vietnamese, Lao Tam, I think in Chinese it would be Lao Xi, which literally means old mind, Old mind here doesn't mean, as I shared before, jaded and tired, but rather has the quality of nurturing and taking care of in a natural way, with a broad view. Dogen wrote, when you handle anything, have the affectionate and caring concern of a parent raising a child. With this spirit, we take care of all beings as though they were our own children, from a grain of rice to the people we cook for, from our shoes to our own bodies. Why do we treat so many things or parts of ourselves as objects? This past month in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha, we've been practicing to recognize this tendency and to cultivate our loving kindness muscles with regard to this tendency to treat others, ourselves, or our experiences as an object. This is the mind that's referred to in the text when Dogen invites us to handle ingredients, the ingredients of our life, as if they were your own eyes. Maybe looking at our own life and the ingredients that we have, we think that some ingredients are more valuable than others. We may not see the value in physical pain, the sadness, and so forth. Some of us might even want to push these things to the back of the pantry so we can't see them. Some might even want to throw them away. However, these ingredients that make up your life are the most important. If you're able to look at the ingredients that you have in the pantry of your own life, oh, what a delicious dish of healing you can make. And that healing, that insight will be unique to you. One time I was on a plane flying from the east coast of the US back to California. On the plane they were showing a cooking show called Chopped. On that show, cooks were given random ingredients that often didn't go together at all. And they were given a time limit to create a delicious dish. This is what we need to do in any meaningful spiritual practice. So, how do we cultivate this parental or nurturing mind? By seeing how we nurture ourselves and others, what we're nurturing in others, and how we're not separate from situations. Is it possible to consider those who we think are our enemies, who perhaps are at this moment in time engaging in acts of great violence, as our children who perhaps have lacked the appropriate guidance and opportunity that might have steered them down a more productive path? How can we help? Is it possible to reflect on the fact that we've not really been very good parents to other living beings after all, perhaps through the way we care for nature? How are we stewarding our natural world? Is it possible to recognize the role that we've also played in contributing to violence? It's so tempting to think that it's someone else, somewhere else, that's the problem. But with the mind of an elder, with the mind of a parent, we see our contribution also. We see the idea that there's another, a they somewhere. Whoever or whatever they might be, it's an illusion. Speaking of illusions, I recently wrote an anonymous appreciation letter to a group that's doing amazing work. A picture of that letter ended up on their Facebook group. People in that Facebook group started analyzing my handwriting. It was hilarious. According to the handwriting analysis by the experts in the group, they said, based on her handwriting, this kind old lady is a retired school teacher. So elder's mind is not about having absolutely everything figured out. It's about wholeheartedly giving it a go, messing up, and then giving it another go. This same heart mind doesn't spoil or neglect ourselves or others. It turns wisdom and compassion inward and outward at the same time. So, one practical way to approach this first practice of cultivating the mind of love, bodhichitta, the first of the 7 practices, is to consider, what has this person nurtured or given birth to in me? And what am I nurturing in this person and in myself at this moment in time? This is the practice that we'll undertake in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha over the course of this coming month. I hope that you'll find it useful and beneficial. It's been such a delight to be together with you. I hope that you've enjoyed this evening's talk. We'll end with the sound of the bell.